I've started the recording, forgot to start it just then, so I've started the recording now. So obviously this session is going to be recorded just like this morning's was. And for those of you who are new to the whole process of the DLE and online and webinars and so on, which is not many of you, but some of you that weren't with me for the previous module. I'm just going to recap. So on your screen, hopefully you can see the DLE site. So what we were talking about this morning, which was the welcome. So you will notice that now over the purple dinosaur, which we have here, there's a little banner that says new activity, and that means that I've loaded something new or something new has gone on that tile. And as you can see there, there's the recording from this morning's session. So I won't open it because it'll start, but what it is there is I've uploaded it, converted the recording from this morning to a YouTube clip. So the whole session that we had this morning, the audio and the PowerPoint and everything that we were doing this morning is there as a recording and as a record. So you can recap, you can scroll back and forth. So if there's a bit that you want to hear again, or for example, when I went over the, those of you who weren't with me this morning, it might be worth having a look through it. Both of you who weren't with me this morning have done online modules before, so you're very familiar with the process. But after the introduction, and we went through the handbook and the module hand-in date and so on and so forth, we also covered a little bit about the assignment. That's not the end of the discussion on the assignment, of course. As we went over this morning, we will be discussing actually writing a research proposal for academic purposes. We'll be outlining that in much more detail tomorrow. And every session that's broadcast is recorded, so you can look back on it. So there is the recording from this morning that I've uploaded already and converted to a YouTube clip. So it's all there for you. Okay. So we are moving on this afternoon, and we're going to be talking about an advanced literature review or a literature review. So some of you weren't or haven't done the previous module, but those of you who have done the previous module will, again, some of this will be revision, but we will be talking about how we adapt a literature review to fulfill the criteria for this particular research proposal. Sorry, yes, just one moment. Yes, Sarah, of course there are. There's room to negotiate. You can apply for an extension, as we discussed this morning, and I have no problem with supporting your application for an extension, to submit it, a 1-week extension or longer if required. So that is something that we can discuss on a one-to-one basis, and I have no problem with you going for an extension. The hand-in date that is published on the module handbook and on the DLE, I am not going to alter. I can't do that, but I have no problem with an extension. Okay, so we're going to be talking about reviewing the literature and writing a literature review. So this presentation, as before, is there on the DLE, and that's what we'll be working through this afternoon. So we've got to write a literature review. And I'm sure all of you are aware that reviewing and writing a literature review is the absolute foundation of any piece of research, because before you can start or even think about a research question, you need to have read and reviewed and analysed what is existing in your particular area of study. So, as it states here, a literature review is an objective, thorough summary and critical analysis of the relevant available literature and research literature and non-research literature. For all of you in your different research areas, there may be some policy, social policy, policy background, sociological background that needs to be discussed to put your research in the social, political context in which it exists right now. And so that summary and discussion needs to have taken place. It needs to bring the person reading your research proposal or your literature review, if it's standing alone, up to date. So where are we with this particular aspect of practice or the literature? So that we have justification for where we're taking our ongoing research. And a good research literature review gathers information about a particular subject from many sources. So it isn't enough to simply go to the nursing literature. You need to look at it in a broader context. And if that broader context means the social policy, the Department of Health guidelines, whatever, but you need to take it further than just the research literature that's available in your field. So what a literature should do, it should contain few personal biases, because what you're doing at this initial stage is presenting others' views. You're presenting what is known about a subject area. It should contain a clear search strategy and selection strategy, and it should be well structured. It should avoid using terminology and jargon, and it should be obviously accurately referenced, appropriately referenced. There are a number of many really important reasons why you undertake a literature review. Now, those of you who did MCH 501 undertook that literature review for an academic purpose, but you were purely undertaking it for the purposes of your research, for your assignment. But hopefully, within that application, you were trying to establish your own personal knowledge about a particular subject area. It's to update current personal knowledge and practice on a particular topic. It's to evaluate current practices and to develop, it may be to develop specific practice guidelines or generic, and to keep up to date. So you might have non-research reasons for doing it, but in terms of your research proposal, this literature review is primarily to focus your research attention. So we've talked about the purpose. So a literature review can take the format of a number of formats. It can take a traditional narrative approach where you critique and summarise a body of literature, and it can gather so that you can gather a volume of literature from a specific subject area and summarise it and synthesise it. So its primary purpose, as it says, is to provide the reader with a comprehensive background for the understanding of current knowledge, and to identify the gaps. And that, I suppose, is the primary purpose, is for you, with this literature review, is to identify the gap. The whole point of reviewing the literature is to bring yourself to the point where you can say, and this is the piece of research that now needs to be done. This is the question that needs to be asked, or this is the statement that needs to be investigated. So it's really difficult to develop that research question without having done your background reading. So over the next couple of days, it's about, for those of you who already have undertaken some sort of literature review, reread, resynthesize, rethink. For those of you who haven't, you've got to start reading. You've got to start reading around your specific research area and seeing where that gap and that issue becomes evident, so that you can refine your research question appropriately. It also helps you with the research process itself, because hopefully you are developing a conceptual framework. So you are hoping to find research that maybe uses a similar methodology and gives you some methodological knowledge, uses mixed methods approach, and so on. So that there is not only are you doing it in terms of your subject area, but you're also doing it in terms of your research methodological knowledge. Okay, I will just unmute you there, Jonathan. So your question is, what if there is no research written about your subject area?
Yeah, or if there's no potentially around the subject area, but there's no research anywhere near the question. Can you just use sort of supporting literature and sort of government documentation and that kind of thing to demonstrate need?
Yeah. So do you remember this morning we talked about grounded theory?
Yeah.
That's where I would suggest that maybe your project might be leading you to. Because there isn't an enormous amount of research written about your particular subject area, you're going to have to look at subject area around role advancement, because you're particularly looking at how people have adapted traditional roles, and that might be where you start with your literature review. Specifically focused on an X role versus Y role, no, there's going to be no research, because firstly, the PA role is so new.
Yeah.
There aren't that many PAs in this country, and we haven't evaluated their role yet, because an awful lot of them are still in training. So it's
but there are sort of 7 or 8 general articles about the role in particular, but there's no comparison.
No.
So obviously, if what I'm saying is sort of building a story behind it, using different literature, obviously bringing in about role advancement generally, and then build up to that question, and obviously that will demonstrate the need, therefore, to undertake the research, won't it?
Absolutely, it will, because there will be an obvious gap, but that's where a methodology such as grounded theory, where you're not relying on the question to have been an obvious gap in the literature, you're developing the body of knowledge as you go along.
Okay,
yeah?
Thank you.
So in terms of, that might guide you in terms of methodology, but equally, where you decide to go specifically with your research, there may be some role comparison research done. It's just not those roles. Do you see what I mean? There will be some research that's been done, for example, comparing the role of a junior doctor or an advanced nurse practitioner in an ED or something, that's used patient outcomes or patient waiting times as an indicator of role comparison in triage and things like that. So there might be that sort of literature that you may be able to apply to your subject area.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, I'm going to mute you again. Okay, so those are the primary purposes, but there is often a problem with the research that we find, and equally we may not find quality research that's been done in this country. That's not necessarily problematic, because of course you can use research that's been done elsewhere. I'm going to go over the systematic review portion relatively quickly, but before I do, has anybody thought that they might have wanted to do a systematic review for their dissertation instead of a piece of research? There's a definitive no from many people, but there are some possible yeses. Okay, writing a research proposal in terms of a systematic review is slightly different when you're than a primary piece of research, but we'll talk about those differences when we talk about the research proposal portion tomorrow. If you are planning to write a research proposal for a systematic review, you will need to have done the narrative review first. And so that portion of the assignment will still need to be undertaken. Because a systematic review is when you've taken a narrative review and you've refocused, you've used other people's data to answer your specific research question. Okay, to answer your question, I won't unmute your mic, Sarah, but to answer your question, what you undertook, for those of you who did MCH 501, what you undertook in that module was a critical review of the literature from a narrative perspective. So you undertook a thematic analysis, which we'll talk about in a minute, on the literature that you found. So what you are going to need to do is you will absolutely be able to use that, because some of you will be a long way ahead in this section than others. So you can take what you did in the previous module and adapt it to refocus your research question. Because you might want to just change it slightly, or you might want to reevaluate, resynthesize in terms of this specific research purpose. So you won't need to redo it. You won't need to redo the searches and so on. You might want to update them a little bit because it was a little while ago, but you can certainly use that as forming the basis of your next stage. So going back to a systematic, so hopefully that answered your question, Sarah. So going on to the purpose of a systematic review is to provide as complete a list as possible of all the published work and unpublished related to your particular subject. So in a systematic review, you need to be incredibly comprehensive. And when writing your research proposal, you will write it in a very specific way. And it's a systematic review is considered to be a positivist approach, a positivist paradigm. So when undertaking a narrative review, which is what you need to do prior to a research proposal, is you need to review the topic, search the literature, gather, analyse the literature, and write the review. What I want for this assignment is the synthesis section. The narrative doesn't need to be there. So we select our topic. Now, all of you pretty much, without exception, have a topic in mind. You might not have refined it. Even those of you who did the previous module, you might want to adapt it slightly, you might want to change your focus slightly, you might want to look specifically at your research requirements. So you've selected your review topic, you then need to refine that topic. So you identify those key words. So it's undertaking that very comprehensive search strategy to make sure you've got significant literature and sufficient literature. Select, and I know I've said this prior to the previous module, but even more so now, you need to be sure that this is what you want to pursue. I don't want to suggest that you undertake writing up a research proposal in something and then in July of this year you go, I can't bear this subject any longer. I've now got to start all over again to write a research proposal to actually undertake for my dissertation. So think about something that's going to hold your interest and you really want to investigate, basically for the next 18 months. Because it needs to hold your interest, and there needs to be sufficient enough data to meet your needs. So the standard approach we specifically need to start looking. We need that inductive method. We look back through the databases, the journals, the abstracts, the articles, and we form a potential list. And then we use a networking method. So we might use, so having searched the databases, found some really fantastic pieces of research to read and review, we might network from those. So look at where a recent paper has identified another journal or another particular research source, especially when you're looking at certain online articles. They suggest other articles that are associated, or suggest other articles that have used the same keywords or similar approaches and so on. So you're networking through what has been published. And then equally, you can use the reference list of a particular journal. So if you found a good systematic review, look at that primary research that they're citing. Go back and look at the originals. We don't do very much manual searching anymore. We don't go off and pick up a journal and leaf through it, because for most of us, we don't have the time. So our search engines and our search strategies online have to be really, really key. Keywords are really important. And I'm sure those of you who've undertaken a literature review in the past, your search strategy, mapping that out in paper format, so keeping a record of where you've been, what you've looked at, what words you've searched, how you've got to the results that you are presenting. Because what I am going to expect in your research proposal is one of your appendices will be your search strategy. I don't want your search strategy in the actual assignment. I want an overview of your search strategy in an appendix, because it doesn't go towards your word count. So that that process that you've gone through can appear in an appendix. So it just needs to be bullet pointed, a Excel spreadsheet, whatever technique you wish to use, but your search strategy will appear in your appendix. So, I mean, this is not an exhausted list of databases, but we're all pretty much familiar with the databases: CINAHL, Cochrane, Medline, PsycInfo, PubMed. Those are commonly used research databases. There's our license here within Plymouth University is excellent. If you're having any challenges regarding your research, you're searching on databases, I would absolutely advocate popping into the university if you can, and physically going for a tutorial with one of our subject librarians. They are fantastic. Our nominated one for the School of Nursing and Midwifery is Julie Moody, and she will happily assist you in a data search. If you physically can't get here to Plymouth to do it, she is available on email, and the links are in the handbook, as are the information is also on the library site of the university. She's very happy to do telephone tutorials and online tutorials with you. So please access our library services, because they are fantastic at helping us. And it might also be a useful technique in terms of your research proposal as well as your dissertation, is to just get some fresh eyes, to get somebody else to look at your strategy. Certainly if you are drawing a blank as to what you want to search. So I think I've talked about the databases, so CINAHL, Medline, PubMed, and so on. And reviews on Cochrane are excellent as well. So using the Cochrane database of systematic reviews is also another vital source of information. Now, some of you may have chosen subject areas where there will not be a systematic review. You don't have to have one, but they are all incredibly useful sources of information. And there's some more about databases and internet searching. Hopefully most of you are quite familiar with this, the actual searching of the literature and using keywords and using the truncations, the and or nots in your search strategies. If you're not and you don't feel confident doing this, then please, as I said, access the assistance, because there's no quick way around this searching, as I'm sure most of you are aware. I say to my undergraduates, the search engine is only as intelligent as the person using it, and that's applicable to all of us. And just repeating the search in a different order or repeating the search in a different way can often result in better or different research articles. So unfortunately, there's no quick way to do this, though. This is quite time consuming. So undertaking the searching itself. So you might want to categorise your studies as you find them. It's peer-reviewed, non-peer reviews, most respected journals. We all know which are the better journals in terms of research material. So categorise your review on what are other reviews, some descriptive research, descriptive pieces, some editorial, as well as some primary researchers. You can organise them in terms of their perspective. But whereas previously doing literature reviews, you will probably focus purely on the subject area, so whatever you were trying to investigate, I would also suggest you look at it from a methodological perspective as well, because I'll expect to see some research that's been undertaken using a similar or complementary methodology that you've chosen. So if you are going down the positivist route, what other trials have been done in your area or in a similar area? If you're going down the qualitative route, what other paradigms have been used to investigate this particular subject area that fit with your paradigm? So I would expect there to be an additional input towards your methodology. So, for example, using articles that have similar views or different views. So that's a really important component. Any questions at that point? Ooh, completely silent out there. Okay. So we've reviewed our articles, we've summarised and evaluated our research articles related to the same topic, following our search of the literature. Oops. So the next stage is that we've got to, once we've found all of this research material, we've then got to analyse the literature. So we talk about a PQRS, though we're not cardiac in focus, this is a PQRS. So you preview, you read, you question it, you read it again, and you summarise it. This is, as I've said before, a particularly time-consuming method. So we preview all our information, and that might be when you do a cursory look at all the abstracts and decide whether you're going to pursue this particular piece of material or not. And then you question the source of the article. Primary, secondary research, non-research literature, so the commentary, the grey literature surrounding the policy stuff. And then we need to read it. And so each article needs to be read, and you need to develop some sort of tool or checklist that you feel matches your way of thinking. There are critical appraisal tools out there. There are some from the previous module that we used, Kemamat et al. Being the one that Heather cited in her session. There are numerous research textbooks out there with critical appraisal tools in their appendices that you can use to critique your literature. I am not set on a particular one. I find that the CASP tools needs to be something that you choose for yourself. So, but that critiquing and analysing using a tool for all literature is a vital step in the analysis of your literature. So decide which one you're going to use and stick with it, because the final part of the analysis needs to be summarising. So you have written a general appraisal on each article. with your key thoughts, your key strengths and weaknesses, so you can really develop a really comprehensive understanding of your research area. So you've done that, and that's, you know, I've talked about that for sort of 20 minutes, and actually that's the incredibly time-consuming bit of the literature review. And those of you who've already done one, a narrative review, it is really time-consuming to get your head around that amount of literature, because you've then got to write it up. And I, as it's alluded to in the assessment guidelines, I don't want an extensive review, a thematic analysis of the literature. I want the synthesis. So you've only got approximately 700 to 1,000 words to outline the synthesis of the literature. It's not the narrative account that's happened, because I'm expecting that to have happened already. But if you were writing this for a narrative review purposes, you would obviously have to outline exactly how you've analysed the literature. But for the research proposal, I don't want you to do that. I don't need you to write that up. So if you were writing up a narrative review, you would outline your introduction, summarise your key sources, your key words, and then you would outline your inclusion and exclusion criteria. So you would outline exactly how you've chosen and justify why you've chosen those particular articles. Because you want to establish that you have looked at a depth and breadth of the literature. Then we go into to answer your question, sorry, one of the questions just come through. What you did, narrative and thematic are the same thing. So it's not one or other. You did in 501, what was undertaken was a narrative review or a thematic review, because what all of you did is a thematic analysis of the literature that you've been presented with. So narrative and thematic, I use those terms interchangeably because they mean the same thing. So you've already done, if those of you who've done 501 have already done this, but not everybody on this module has done 501. So I need, as I said to you earlier, this is a little bit of revision for some of you. What you don't need to, you're not repeating what you've just done. You are adapting what you've just done to fulfill the purposes of this for the assignment. But I'm talking generic terms. If we were undertaking a narrative review, I'm talking about it generally. So those of you who, as I said, did 501, this is complete revision for you. Those of you who didn't, this might be new information. Does that answer your question? Okay. Right, so what we've got to do in a narrative review or a thematic review, I'll use the words interchangeably, is we've given us an introduction, we have outlined our inclusion and exclusion criteria, and we have presented our search strategy. And then what we do in the main body of the review is we present the findings of the research, we present the findings of the literature. Because having reviewed them in terms of a critical appraisal tool, what we will then have been able to do is a thematic analysis on all of that literature. So the themes have emerged from the literature, and these are those themes. So if you've reviewed 30 articles about, let's go back to the lovely example I was talking about this morning of hand washing techniques, and you've looked at all of the compliance and concordance articles about hand washing in the acute critical care environment, for example. If you undertook a thematic analysis, you might find that time and workload is a theme across all of the literature. A lot of the articles discuss that it is time pressures and time management and workloading issues that influence compliance and concordance. And then you might find a theme is education, that people don't know that they're doing it wrong. And then you might have found that another theme could have been availability of sinks and so on. So that would be the themes that have come across all of the literature that you've read. And so you discuss each theme independently. So, and then each theme tends to be summarised at how it relates to each other. So how these different themes, if we were talking about compliance and concordance with hand washing techniques, for example, would be related to each other. So that there might be a consensus. Equally, there might be an obvious challenge in each of the themes that's emerged. And this is, in a narrative review, this should be discussed. So each theme would have some sort of concluding discussion at the end of its section. So if you were talking about, again, go back to the same example, education or knowledge of education, you might make some concluding statement in that, talking about that theme related purely to education in relation to compliance and concordance with hand washing. So when discussing the research literature in a critical review, you need to also discuss the methodologies, and this is really, really important, certainly for you at this stage. So was it qualitative? What is it quantitative? And how did those study designs match with the research questions? So you're asking those really key questions about the research design. So was it a case study analysis? Was it a piece of grounded theory? Was it ethnography? Was it phenomenology, for example? If it was a quantitative paradigm, was it a longitudinal prospective study? Was it a retrospective study? Was it quasi-experimental, etc.? So we've discussed and we've analysed exactly how the study design and the paradigm has sat together. And those of you who've undertaken a narrative review in the past might look back on it now and say, actually, my methodological discussion wasn't as detailed as maybe it should be, or maybe it needs to be in the future. So in terms of refocusing a narrative review that you may have already done, it might be about re-examining the methodology. We discuss the results, we evaluate the strengths and the weaknesses, and we discuss the similarities and the difference within these themes. Because it's, as it says there, so we explain and justify any inconsistencies, discuss any inconsistencies, whether they were justified or not, but most importantly, it's about identifying the gaps, because the whole purpose here in a narrative review is to conclude with the gaps in the existing research. So we need to be a little bit objective, try not to use descriptions and quotes, and write your findings succinctly. And at the conclusion of your literature review, should be a concise summary of what you've found, what you've discovered, and your review should offer a rationale for conducting further research. So in a narrative review, the end of your review should allow you to make recommendations for further research, for further practice, for education, and what implications they may hold. So, whiz through that incredibly quickly. Have you got any questions on a narrative review, a generic narrative review? None at all. Okay, so any generic module questions, I've Any questions at all? Oh, you've all gone silent on me. Do you really have nothing at all to ask? Okay, so what I want the do some of you, I think it's probably, I'm looking down the list of people, 1, 2, 3. So out of the group, 4 of you have just done MCH 501. So 4 of you already have a narrative literature review that has been through the academic process, and you've got something to start with. So my first question to you 4 is, do you understand what you need to do to that piece of work for the purposes of the research proposal? I've put all 4. Okay. Okay, so Tracy, oh, hello. Hi, Tracy.
Hello.
Hi. Put you on the spot now.
That's
I
fine.
haven't seen the IMS module guide and assessment guide recently, so I can't quite remember what you had to do for that module, but I can't imagine that a narrative review is that different from what I'm talking about here.
Okay, because we for that module we needed to talk about research methodologies, and it was again the starting point to going on to develop our dissertations.
Right.
And as part of that, I talked about look how it's about literature and your anyway. As part of that, I discussed obviously the literature around my proposal, not that it was a proposal, but how I wanted to go on to maybe to develop my dissertation. So I'm guessing it's very similar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it sounds very similar, very similar.
Okay.
But I'm not sure how long ago you did it, so it might need some revision and some updating.
Absolutely updating. I did it in 2014, and since then I know that there's been a few research elements that have come out recently, so I know I need to update it, so that's not a problem.
Yeah, okay. I mean, that's not that old, is it? So 2014, it's only
No.
talking, you're only talking 2 years. So
Yeah.
yeah, it might be about updating it slightly, and it might be about refocusing it. So
Okay. I don't. Yeah.
so that's fine. And so in essence, what you've done is you've done the first sort of 3 stages of the research proposal. So most of you have already got some piece of work to start with. So I'm going to unmute you again now, Tracy.
Thank you.
So that's great. So just to recap, because not everybody did answer in the affirmative. So you have this narrative review. So what you've undertaken is you've done your search, you've done your critical review of the literature, so you've looked at each piece of literature, you've done a critical appraisal tool, and you've written it up in terms of thematic analysis. And you've, without exception, you were all successful. So it has met the criteria that were required. What we need to do now is to sort of rejig it in a way, because for the purposes of the research proposal, I don't want that whole 3,000 words condensed down into 750, because that would be a pointless exercise. What I want you to do is to take basically the concluding statements in each one of your themes to ensure that you've got an overall synthesis of the literature, because what you're presenting to me in the research proposal is simply the overall synthesis. So in a way, it's the introduction and the concluding commentary on each one of the themes that you discussed. And then so that you have given a presentation of the synthesis of the literature without the stages before. And in one of the appendices, I want to see the search strategy so that I know that you've been to all of these places and you've done that critical appraisal of all of this research and you've come up with a thematic analysis. So some of you did very, very detailed literature summaries in your appendices for your first one, so you can represent those exact same pieces of material. You don't need to repeat them. Those of you who haven't done that may need to, and I have no problem whatsoever in anybody who wishes that didn't do 501 to have a look at some of the material that was on 501. You can access it quite easily by searching on the DLE and seeing what some of the others have already undertaken to help you with this section, so that you can critically appraise the literature that's out there and present it in a synthesis. So hopefully, for those of you who haven't got a narrative review already, it's going to require a revisiting, maybe some rewording, some re-evaluation of the literature itself. Okay, so does that help those that didn't answer in the affirmative? I'm not going to pick on anybody in particular. Good. Yes, there is a maximum word count in terms of the assignment, Jonathan. It's 3,000 words. But what is often the case is that there will be quite a lot of additional material in the appendices. So 3,000 words for the core assignment. And in terms of that section of the research proposal, there's not a maximum word count. But remember, I've allocated marks for each section. So you've got 20 marks to get in this section, and therefore I'm basically suggesting that you're writing about 700 words. Yeah. Sorry, I will just go to Matt and then I'll come to you. Hi, Matt.
Hi, Rachel.
Yeah,
it was just a quick question. She mentioned taking the sort of previous narrative review and doing some rejigging, rewording.
Yeah.
I was just, in terms of rewording, how does that sort of fit with Turnitin and sort of self-plagiarism? Are you happy for us to just sort of alter things a bit, that condensed version? That's not going to kind of hinder any plagiarism rules or things. Does that make sense?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't have an impact because for academic standards purposes, you can't plagiarise yourself.
That's what I thought. I just wanted to confirm, because I know we will turn it in as flash up a huge percentage sometimes, and we do things like it's acceptable.
Yeah. You're giving a lot of feedback there, Matt. I don't know what's happening your end. But yes, there will be a degree of rewording and rephrasing some of the commentary that you've already made. So, but in terms of Turnitin, it shouldn't, it won't appear as plagiarism. Although sometimes in these studies they generally do come up with quite alarmingly high percentages, but that doesn't give you, that's not a problem.
Okay, thanks, Rachel.
Okay. I'm gonna mute Matt because it sounds like he's in a train station. And Sarah B, hi there.
Hi. I think my question was much the same. I was writing and didn't catch the synthesis that you said when you put in the appendix. It's okay to sort of take portions of the same work.
Yeah, it's sort of take portions of the same work. If you remember when you undertook the narrative review, at the end of each of the narrative, the thematic discussions, you had some sort of concluding or overarching statement. It's that bit that I want in the synthesis, and not your search strategy and all of the stuff that you put in your previous assignment. Your search strategy I want, but I want that to be an appendix.
Okay.
So that whole section that all of you did for 501 on search strategy can be Appendix 1.
Right, and that's the bit that you...
And all of that work that you made... Sorry,
that's the bit that you can sort of take and put into the appendix without having to rewrite it.
You don't have to rewrite it. Equally, all of that section that you made, or some of you did very comprehensive summaries where you presented all the material and you put those in your appendix. Those can go back in this appendix as well, because they are supporting material for this piece of work as well as they were for their last piece of work. So there's no need to repeat. You might add 2 or 3. There might be some new research that you want to add, or you might want to add some methodological information. So you may add to it. Equally, you may delete some stuff that you no longer want to refer to. But yeah, you can rejig that piece, and that's what I mean when I say that the modules can sit together as sort of a group piece at the end. Does that answer?
Okay. Yeah, thanks. You just always worry about, if you're regurgitating the same stuff, that's where you'll get penalised. But that's good. Thank you.
No, I don't refer to it as regurgitating. I don't feel it's necessary for you to repeat the same piece of work again. What I want you to do is to review it and say, okay, is this still relevant? Can I reword it? Can I improve it maybe? Can I adapt it? Now focusing it on the literature review, on the research proposal, because you're taking it in a slightly different direction this time. But it doesn't mean that you need to repeat it all again.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah? Yes, so I think I've answered everybody's question. Any other questions? Any other questions? Sorry, excuse me. No other questions? Okay, so I will stop now. If there are any specific questions related to literature reviewing or literature searching, I'm in the office. If you want to give me a ring, great. I am going to ring you in about 10 minutes, Helen, as agreed. Anybody else wants to have a one-to-one conversation with me, I'm very happy to talk to you on the phone. And I will. My number is on the module handbook, and I will be in the office until 4 o'clock this afternoon. Otherwise, we will reconvene at 11 tomorrow to talk about writing a research proposal. So I will see you virtually. See you all tomorrow at 11. And so, yeah, any questions, then either you can give me a ring or we can talk tomorrow during the session. So thank you very much. There's been a lot to think about today, and there's probably a lot of thinking that you need to do. And unlike last module where you had weeks, fortnights in between each session, these sessions are bang, 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 bang very quickly together. So I'm conscious that you need some thinking time. So have some thinking time, but I am available for any kind of tutorial support over the course of the next week. And then if you want some additional discussions, we can book some time. Okay, so I look forward to getting together with you later tomorrow, and or give me a ring in the office. Okay, thank you very much. Yes, Sarah, sorry. I will sort out, I'll give the professional development unit a ring in a minute if I can't manually add you to the system. Okay, Sarah?